Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
So let's move on to topic 2. Here we'll look at resource planning and its need. So in the earlier topic we learned about conservation. Now here we'll look at resource planning. So in conservation we said it is important for the resources or use of resources to be planned so that we can conserve the resources. Okay. Now, resources are unevenly distributed and limited. They are not available for finite amount of time. Okay, they are very limited and they are unevenly distributed. Meaning that if you look at our country, the resources are available in equal quantities everywhere. No, that is not true. In some areas, there are availability of resources, while in other areas, there is shortage of resources. Some areas have very few, while other areas have large number of resources, varieties of resources. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is that resources are limited, yes, but even in their distribution, it is not equal, it is uneven. Okay. Now, resource planning is used or resource planning is needed for the conservation of resources because resource planning helps us to conduct proper use and utilization of resources. With the planning, we use and utilize the resources in a proper manner. So resource planning is a proper use and utilization of resources. Okay. The resource planning, what it does, it prevents overuse and exploitation of resources. There is a tendency, huge tendency for overuse and overexploitation of resources today, right? And because of which there has been a lot of damages on the environment amongst our societies. All that damages have had been taking place. Now that in order to prevent that, we have to plan the resource. We have to conduct resource planning. Okay. So we have to balance the utilization of resource. Various ways of utilizing, how we take the resource, how we try to renew the resource, all that needs to be balanced. Okay. So resource planning is a proper use and utilization of resources. So now let us look at resource planning in India. Now here is a list of different states in India: Rajasthan, Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh in Jammu and Kashmir, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. The resources available in these areas. So in Rajasthan, resources available is solar energy. Resources lacking, what they don't have, is water. Arunachal Pradesh, they have abundance of water resources, but they do not have infrastructural development. They don't have proper infrastructure. In Ladakh, there is uranium, okay, uranium, but it does not have water resources and also infrastructure. Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, these regions are rich in coal and minerals, but and they are self-sufficient. So you can see that some states, some areas have plenty of resources and they are self-sufficient. Some have very less resource, just one resource, and they have other lackings. They need other resources. Some have decent amount of resources, yet they still lack. They are not self-sufficient. They have to depend on others for other resources. Okay. This is why we need resource planning, so that the balance between the distribution, proper use and utilization of the resources can be done. Okay, so that the resources which the states have, they can share it with others which do not have. The resources which others have can share with the states which do not have. Okay, so with the sharing, with all these measures, what can be done? The balance can be maintained, balance of utilization of resources. Okay, so that itself is called resource planning. Now resource planning is taken at the national level, state level, and regional or local level. So this resource planning does not only happen at the national level. It happens in 3 different stages. Okay. One is national, the other is state, and the third is regional or local levels. Now, after independence, our country launched 5-year plans for the development of the country. Now, the resource planning has been part of that 5-year plan of the government for the development of the country. Okay. So there are 3 stages of resource planning, 3 main stages of resource planning. First, what do? You identify and prepare the inventory of resources. First, you survey, you see that area, you examine the area, you find out what resources are available and the quantity of the resources available. Okay. The second one, you develop a planning structure empowered with appropriate technology, skill and setup institutions for implementing the aims of the research planning. So in the second step, you plan what is required, what institutions, what kind of technology, what kind of skill and training, what kind of people is required for that resources to be utilized in a proper way. Which way can it be utilized? So that is the second step. The third step is matching the resource development plans, keeping in mind the overall national development plans. So first you identify, second you plan, and third you try to implement that plan. You try to see how the use of the resource can match the development plan of the country. Okay, if the country wants to build industries, if the country does not have industries of its own and is depending upon the other countries, the foreign countries, then if the country has iron ore deposits or resource, large quantity of iron ore resource, then what does the country do? It identifies the iron ore sources and then it develops a planning how to utilize that source and one resource, and once that is done, then it is applied. Okay, it is used in a way that it goes with the aim or goal of development for that particular country. So that is how resource planning is done. So resource planning is used for development of any region, any country, any part of the world. Okay, but that also, the resource planning also depends upon the availability of resources. In order for the planning to happen, there has to be resources. If there is no resources, how can the planning take place, right? There has to be appropriate technological skill. There has to be proper technology required for the utilization of the resource, for the planning of the resource. And thirdly, there has to be institutional setups. Meaning there has to be certain institutes, okay, which will aid or which will help in the process of the planning and its execution. So these 3 are very important part of the planning. Okay, and if any of this is missing, like for example, a country has resource and has institutional setup but no technological skill, then the development is not possible. Okay, the proper utilization of resource which will then go on to contribute in the development of that country or that region is not possible. So for the development to occur or take place, these 3 has to be available. The 3 are resources, technological skill and institutional setup. Like we saw briefly in the chart that many regions in the country have resources, but there are other regions which do not have resources. They lack in the same resource or they lack in other resources. Okay, so the resources, the states which have resources, they are quite developed. Okay, but the states which do not have resources, which lack in resources, they are economically backward. Okay, so in India, for the resource development, it has to aim in the availability of the resources. Okay, the development takes place only when there is availability of resource and when there is technological skill or technological assistance. And the quality of human resource is also very important. You have resource, you have technology, but if you don't have human resource, then how will you make use of that, right? It's the human beings who, with the use of technology, will make sure how to utilize the resources. And another factor which is important is the historical experience of the people. Okay, so the historical experience also leads to the development. For example, India during the British rule went through a period where there was no industrial development, where the economy was very low. Okay, so because of that, the economic development or the use of resources or the development of utilization of resources, that took place only after a long time. Okay, that did not take place during the British rule, and India became very poor. But that very state led to India becoming a underdeveloped country or a poor country. Had there been no such experience of India, okay, had there been no such historical events that occurred, then that the condition or the status of India as underdeveloped or poor country had not would not have happened. All right, so historical experience is also very important for the development of a country.